Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us on this nice, chilly, but sunny Manitoba morning here at the Manitoba Legislature. I am Wayne Ewasko, the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Learning, and I would like to first acknowledge that we here in Manitoba reside on Treaties 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 lands, which are the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and of course the homeland of the Métis Nation. To begin, I would like to thank the Honourable Karina Gould, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, along with our provincial partner, Jodie Kehl, Executive Director of the Manitoba Child Care Association, for being part of today's announcement and joining me here in the room. Also joining us virtually, we have Karen Laflèche from the Manitoba Child Care Association, and I also like to thank her for joining us as well. I would first like to acknowledge the hardworking and dedicated staff in our early learning and childcare sector. They are valuable in ensuring our children are cared for so parents can participate in the workforce or attend training and education programs. I would now like to invite Minister Gould, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, to say a few words. Minister Gould.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am so delighted to be with you today, and thank you, Minister Ewasko, for having me as part of an announcement that is so crucial to the development of Manitoba's children. I am joining you today from Burlington, Ontario. This place is rich in history and the modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, the lands spanning from Lake Ontario to the Niagara Escarpment are steeped in Indigenous history. The territory is mutually covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Ojibwe, and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This land is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In August last year, Minister Hussein joined Minister Squires to announce a Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement with Manitoba. Grâce à cette entente, le Manitoba reçoit plus de 1,2 milliard de dollars sur 5 ans pour soutenir le coût moyen de 10 dollars par jour des places en garderie réglementées dans la province d'ici mars 2023. Ce qui réduit nettement le coût des services de garde pour les familles de la province. By the end of this year, Manitoba families will see a 50% reduction in average parent fees for children up to 6 years old in regulated childcare. In fact, it was only 3 weeks ago with Premier Stephenson and Minister Ewasko that we were announcing that out-of-pocket fees for families with children in regulated childcare would be reduced by 30% on average. Today, I am proud to be here again with Minister Ewasko to announce that we have extended the existing Canada-Manitoba Early Learning and Childcare Agreement, which includes support for Manitoba's childcare workforce. This investment of close to $98 million over 4 years will help us to continue building and strengthening regulated childcare services for children 6 years old and under, as well as provide support for recruitment and retention in the early childhood workforce. This agreement is separate and distinct from the Canada-wide agreement signed last August. The extension agreement with Manitoba is a continuation of the bilateral agreement signed with the province in 2017. Thanks to past investments provided under this agreement, over 700 childcare spaces were created in Manitoba, and we are going to continue building on that success. From the beginning of the process to create a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, our government has acknowledged that childcare workers have faced difficult working conditions, especially during the pandemic. The true value of their work has not been fully recognized. Cela explique que les éducateurs de la petite enfance considèrent ce métier comme un simple tremplin voué à avenir limité, quelque chose à faire en attendant qu'une meilleure possibilité d'emploi se pointe. It is important that the financial and professional welfare of their careers is a key part of the bilateral agreements, because we know early childhood educators are the very heart of a high quality early learning and childcare system. That is why the Canada-Manitoba Extension Agreement includes a one-time investment of nearly $19.2 million in workforce funding for 2021-2022. We know our childcare workers are dedicated professionals who are passionate about their jobs. They deserve greater opportunities to develop their skills along with the training and programs they need to succeed. L'entente conclue aujourd'hui signifie que l'on peut se baser sur l'excellent travail déjà entamé pour améliorer l'apprentissage et la garde des jeunes enfants au Manitoba. It also means more support for our early childhood educators, who, as I mentioned, are at the heart of the Canada-wide system we are building with provinces and territories. This is a major achievement, and I applaud all those who work so hard to make it happen. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister Gould. I am absolutely thrilled to be making this announcement with our federal partner and our local partners, our sector partners, just 19 days after we told Manitoba families that we were expanding eligibility to our child care subsidy program. When we made that announcement, we promised additional investments would be coming to support the early childhood workforce, and today we are delivering on that promise. Today, our government is announcing that we are extending the Canada-Manitoba Early Learning and Childcare Agreement, which includes additional funding to support recruitment and support for retention of early learning childcare workers across Manitoba. Today, Canada and Manitoba are announcing close to $98 million in investments into early childhood education for Manitoba families over the next 4 years, with an additional $75 million in subsidy and parent fee funding. This means we are investing over $170 million into the early learning and childcare sector. As a part of this 4-year, $98 million investment, $15.5 million in funding this year will be used for ongoing commitments made under previous agreements, including supporting affordable childcare by providing operating grant funding for over 1,800 spaces, supporting diversity and inclusion through increased funding for Francophone and Indigenous programming, and expanded supports for children with additional needs, and support for rural and northern communities to build sector capacity. Along with maintaining previous commitments, Manitoba will also introduce 2 new initiatives to support the ELCC sector. The Renovation Expansion Grant, providing the nonprofit sector with funding to expand on their existing spaces to meet community needs, and increased opportunities for childcare assistant certification training by improving access to the required 40-hour course through subsidized costs and expanded programming. To build on these initiatives, we also understand how important it is to support a strong early childhood workforce to ensure quality early learning and childcare programming continues to be delivered, nurturing our youngest citizens. We have finalized a one-time early childhood workforce funding allocation of nearly $19.2 million to support initiatives that attract new workers into the sector and provide incentives to retain experienced staff members currently working in the sector. First, we will prioritize implementing retention initiatives, expending up to $12.6 million by March 31st, 2022 to provide immediate benefits and economic support to the early learning childhood sector, helping to retain qualified and experienced staff, acknowledging length of service. These retention strategies include the wage bridge benefit to increase wages for current eligible staff, enhancing economic stability and supporting the lowest paid workers in the sector to bridge gaps until the wage grid under the Canada-wide Canada-Manitoba Early Learning and Childcare Agreement is implemented. The retirement enhancement benefit to provide a 1-year top-up of the percentage offered by Manitoba to the pension plan for centres and the RRSP program for home child care providers, and the tax-free savings account investment to provide facilities with funding to provide staff a one-time investment in a tax-free savings account to support increased financial security of the workforce based on years of service. We also recognize the importance of growing our early childhood workforce and incentivizing new workers to join the sector to provide early learning and care for our children. Therefore, the remaining funds will be targeted towards Manitoba's recruitment strategies, which will be gradually rolled out throughout the next fiscal year, including attracting qualified workers by providing tuition reimbursements to early childhood educators already enrolled in or who are recent grads from an ECE training program, removing the barriers of entry into an ECE program by directing funding ECE training programs with a focus on underserved communities, providing supports to child care assistants seeking ECE certification by providing a program benefit, and modernizing the early childhood workforce landscape through the redevelopment of competencies and career laddering by hiring a consultant. These recruitment and retention strategies under the one-time workforce funding allocation will set the stage for transitioning into the long-term workforce initiatives set out in the new Canada-Manitoba Canada-wide ELCC agreement, including the $33.3 million targeted for an operating supplement to support a minimum wage grid for ELCC workers, which will be implemented in early 2022-2023. The announcement today also builds on recent investments under the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement to expand eligibility to its childcare subsidy program, resulting in nearly half of regulated spaces being subsidized. In an effort to support the subsidy threshold increases announced just 19 days ago, Canada and Manitoba are investing up to $75 million to address the operational needs of facilities through a 6-month subsidy advance, ensuring funding is in place to enroll children in subsidized spaces. A portion of these funds will also be used to cover the costs of parent fees for 3 months for families accessing subsidized childcare. This funding will support facilities to reduce the administrative burden related with the growing number of families that are now eligible to receive financial assistance for childcare subsidies, and helps to ensure Manitoba is on track to achieve its key joint commitment to reduce out-of-pocket parent fees by 50% by December 31st, 2022. Before I conclude, I would like to once again express gratitude to the early learning and childcare workforce, which even in these challenging times continues to demonstrate its dedication and passion to ensuring that children's early learning experiences have a positive impact on their growth and development to help them learn and succeed later in life. I will now ask Jodie Kehl, the Executive Director for the Manitoba Child Care Association, to share a few words with us. Over to you, Jodie.
Thank you, Minister Ewasko. Thank you, Minister Gould. Today's announcement is a critical step in supporting Manitoba's early learning and childcare sector. We know, we've heard it just recently from Minister Gould this morning, that early childhood educators and providers are at the heart of a high-quality, regulated childcare system. They need to be fairly compensated. They are the solid foundation on which childcare services are to be built. Today's announcement is welcomed and long awaited. An effective childcare system will include a dedicated and comprehensive workforce strategy, one that clearly includes fair compensation, benefits, educational and professional development pathways, and an overall recruitment and retention strategy for the childcare workforce. This strategy must be one that stabilizes the current workforce and provides a roadmap for the future one. Over the past 2 years, as we've heard, the long-standing challenges that have faced Manitoba's childcare sector have only been amplified. Increases to wages and investments paid directly to ECEs are long overdue. The one-time increase to the workforce pension plan and the TFSA contributions are good preliminary initiatives to address the workforce strategy or workforce crisis. The funding allocated towards ECE training and tuition will be another opportunity to build a strong professional workforce for families to provide high-quality, inclusive, and culturally supportive childcare for children and families in Manitoba. If we are truly talking about our most precious resource, our children, then we must strengthen the childcare workforce. The early learning and childcare sector must be competitive so that we are attracting and retaining the best educated ECEs to provide high-quality care to children in Manitoba. MCCA looks forward to our continued partnership with the government to ensure that our ECEs have the supports that they need to be successful. Thank you, Minister Ewasko, Minister Gould, and to both the governments of Manitoba and Canada for their continued commitment to children and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodie, for those words, and absolutely an incredible day for not only Manitoba families, but definitely our early learning childcare sector workforce as well. With that, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our announcement for this morning, and we're going to be opening it up for some questions.
Can you talk about how the minimum wage grid will work? Is there any numbers you can give us?
So the minimum wage grid. So as already mentioned, and I can turn it over to Minister Gould in a few seconds if she'd like to add in for sure. As we've already said, some of the wage grid is going to be fully implemented and working with our childcare sector and also with our partners at the federal government. We're going to be implementing that within early in this next fiscal year of 22-23. And we know that there is a gap. And so that's where part of the 19.2 million is going to go to try to bring some of those individuals up in their wages, whether it's an ECE or a child care assistant.
What's the floor for a child care assistant and ECE going?
What is it going to be? I believe, some of those details, Carol, I think we're going to be looking at. I believe it's just over $14 an hour, I believe. Mr. Gould, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I wanted to state that as part of the Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreements that we signed with Manitoba, the province is developing that wage grid. But in the interim, until that comes into force, this $19.2 million will serve as a really important bridge for the early learning and childcare workforce. And so it's my understanding that, as Minister Ewasko announced, we're going to see over 1,000 ECEs and childcare assistants see a slight increase in their wages as we bridge toward the implementation of that wage grid over the course of the next year. And the other point that I would make that I think is really innovative and important that Manitoba is putting forward are some of the pension top-ups that they're looking to do, because we know in order to retain people in a workforce, it's not just about existing wages and ensuring that those are fair and that they're fairly compensated, but also that there are benefits available to them. And Manitoba, I think, is putting forward some important incentives for people to remain in the workforce and recognizing years of service for those that are taking care of, as Jodie so rightly said, our most precious resource, our children.
Thanks, Minister Gould. And just to add to Carol's question, so I misspoke a little bit about the $14. So the ECE 2s, we're looking at starting wage of just over $20, almost 21, and ECEs were about $16.51, and it's the child care assistants that were just over the 13. So we can get you more specifics as we move along as well. Thanks, Carol.
So that's where we're going to. What was it previously, or what is it now?
Previously, that's where we're looking at, and so there's some that are below that average wage, and so that's where the 19.2 funding is going to come into play with getting them up over that threshold immediately following this announcement, basically within the next few weeks.
And what about for recruitment? I'm wondering about education, helping people who decide they do want to take this career path. What is that going to look like for somebody? Are those details available yet?
I think in regards to recruitment and of course retention, and as many of you know, wearing my former hat as the Minister of Advanced Education, Skills and Immigration, the new skills, talent, and knowledge strategy is housed in that department. But that's an entire overall Manitoba strategy, north, east, south, and west. And we know that that in certain sectors within our province, we've got a shortfall. And so initially, we want to make sure that we're retaining the high quality staff that we have in the early learning childhood sector as it is. And then we'll look at different recruitment options, and we'll be working quite closely not only with our federal partners, but of course with Ms. Kehl and her sector and the child care centers, as far as how do we introduce students or potentially other individuals into this this very professional opportunity for not only them, but to work with, again, our most precious resource, our kids.
We're going to go to Zoom now for a moment.
Thank you. A reminder to our reporters on the Zoom call, you will have one preliminary and one follow-up question. Up first this morning from the Brandon Sun, Kyle.
Good morning. I was wondering if there's any plans in the future for this early learning and childhood care agreement to expand funding to include, children who are 6 years old and younger.
So this does include children 6 years old and under. That is part of the Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement with Manitoba. And today's announcement specifically is with regards to workforce supports and the extension of the initial early learning and childcare agreement that we reached with Manitoba back in 2017. And as Minister and it's an additional 1,800 spaces that will be created through this, while also supporting recruitment, retention, and quite frankly, recognition of the professionalism of our ECE workforce.
Sorry, I misspoke. I meant 6 years old and older.
Oh, okay. At this point, it's really focused on 6 years and under. We still have work to do to cover that population. As you might recall, the agreement between the governments of Manitoba and Canada is looking to expand the number of childcare spaces available by an additional 23,000 spaces over the next 5 years. So we need to keep doing that, and that will be the focus of this agreement in particular. Though I can assure you that as Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, I continue to look at before and after school care, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. I think we need to focus on ELCC at this point in time, but certainly continue to have conversations about before and after school care.
All right, thank you.
From CTV Winnipeg, Catherine.
Yeah, my question's for Jodie. I'm wondering if you could give us kind of an idea of what staffing is like today, staffing levels are like today in the sector, and how the pandemic has kind of played a factor in that, if any.
Well, absolutely. As I alluded to earlier, I mean, the challenges of recruitment and retention have certainly been amplified over the last 2 years. And so today's announcement is really welcome to start addressing some of those systemic challenges within the system. What we've heard is that there's about 30% of facilities that are running on provisional licenses because they're unable to attract and retain qualified, educated ECEs. And so today's announcement will be one more of those steps to help to provide that foundation to ensure that we are adequately remunerating our early childhood educators, and so that we are stabilizing the current workforce, but then as we talked about with tuition and education requirements or initiatives, how do we set the pathway for our future workforce as well?
And additionally to that, you mentioned the issues with retention. Can you expand on what are kind of the biggest barriers to keeping ECs and other members of your workforce?
I think probably the greatest barrier is salary. I mean, it's not a surprise probably to anyone that early childhood educators have not been historically paid what they deserve to be paid. And so, a couple of really exciting things have happened in our province over the last couple of months. The shift of early learning and childcare moving into a shared ministry under Minister Ewasko with education is really critical, I think, in terms of perception of what early learning and childcare is. Children don't start learning the day before they go to kindergarten. Early learning starts, the greatest brain development is from 0 to 5 years of age. And so the important work that early learning childcare offers to young children in many ways is just so critical. And so the work that RECs are doing needs to be recognized. I'm excited and optimistic about the agreements that we have with our federal government. And today's initiative is just that one more layer towards supporting our workforce.
Before our next reporter, a note to the reporters, our federal minister will have to leave momentarily. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much.
From CJOB, Skylar.
Hi there. Just to follow up to Jodie's question, or the question to Jodie from Catherine as well. Obviously, salary is going to be the big indicator of whether or not somebody wants to join the ECE work. But there's obviously got to be some other factors as well. Just listening to your answer, I think maybe early childhood educators are maybe a little overworked. Their workload's probably a little bit more than it used to be. What are some of those other factors at play other than the number on the paycheck when it comes to making an attractive place to work?
You're right. Absolutely. It is not all about the hourly wage. The work that ECs do is, as they know, critical to young children's development. But you're right. Since the onset of the pandemic, early learning and childcare has been open. We have stepped up since March of 2020. Many facilities have not been closed, and you're right. So we have a sector that is overburdened, exhausted, and today's announcement, I really am optimistic, is that glimmer of hope to signal to our sector that there's more and there's better to come, that the work that they do is critical. I think that one of the greatest learning lessons through the pandemic is how critical and how essential early learning and childcare is. We've continued to say, thanks to childcare, Manitoba works. Without early learning and childcare, we saw throughout the last 2 years, our economy is going to falter. Whether you have children directly in a childcare program, folks that work in healthcare can't go to work without childcare. Someone that works at a grocery store can't go to work without childcare. And so it's all these things combined that have been some of the greatest learning lessons throughout the pandemic that will help to sort of fortify our steps forward in terms of supporting the sector.
We now return to the news conference theater.
Tuition reimbursements is part of this. Are we talking about the entirety of tuition being reimbursed or just partially?
I think, thanks Ian for that question. I think when the agreement was just been signed within the last week, and some of those details are still to be ironed out. But as we announced, just 19 days ago already. That announcement 19 days ago was more along the lines of affordability. Now we're getting into that recruitment, retention, training, and so that's definitely, I guess, to say there's more good news to come on some of those details as far as how much is going to be subsidized for whether it's an ECE or a CCA, a childhood care assistant.
Minister Gould had mentioned before she left about the pension contribution and seemed to say that was sort of a Manitoba initiative. Is this specific to Manitoba? Is this unique to Manitoba? Can either of you elaborate on that?
So, do you want to? Sure. Yeah, we'll let Jodie tackle this.
It is unique to Manitoba. Manitoba, I think, one of only 2 jurisdictions that offers any sort of pension type benefit, retirement benefit to their workforce, and so this is a critical investment this morning to help enhance that. So Manitoba's registered pension plan was introduced in 2009, and it's a wonderful retention tool that our province has initiated to support our workforce. And so enhancement to that this morning is a wonderful step in the right direction.
Why did Manitoba choose to go in that direction, perhaps, maybe, Minister Ewasko?
As far as an enhancement, or how did it start in 2009?
The enhancement, the decision to spend
Yeah,
money on that one.
I think-
Could have been spent elsewhere.
I think, again, as you know, today's focus is to, number one is to make sure that our early childhood educators and assistants are feeling, to a certain degree, acknowledged and appreciated with all the hard work that they've been doing over not only the last 2 years, but for years and years and years. Again, providing that care and learning opportunities for our children, for those individuals that absolutely have to get up and go to work each and every day. And so the one-time pension boost, I guess, is there. We have the money for it. We're allocating the money for that. And then in regards to also the tax-free savings account as well is another bit of a boost. And that's, again, to show our appreciation as Manitobans to those essential workers that take care of our kids each and every day.
This will be the last question.
Just about sustainability, like, is there any plan to review the budget of the whole system? I'm just thinking, means tested, fees, I don't know, like, this is a big investment, something that's going to help get the system over a hump and maybe hopefully into something that's sustainable. But how long can this last? I mean, if there's not, a federal government that's willing to put up the money, what's going to happen in 5 years? How is this going to continue? How can you make sure that this is not something that's going to get upended by somebody with different priorities?
I think definitely since we became government in 2016, we made sure that we spoke to Manitobans and they know that we're serious about early childhood learning, especially when the minister, as Jodie mentioned earlier on, as the premier, I should say, basically brought over early childhood learning into the education department, because there is that synergy. And so this agreement that we've signed today, the second part of it, I guess, that is signed with the federal government, is an ongoing, and there's an extension for 5 years. And so I think definitely as we go along with whether it's funding or continued collaboration and communication with the sector, I think we want to make sure to basically do a check on what's working, please leave it alone, and what's okay but needs some tweaking, and what doesn't need to be there and maybe need to get rid of it. So
we were initially told last summer that we'd hit that $25 per hour minimum wage within the coming fiscal year. It seems like that's no longer the timeline for it. Why has there been a bit of a delay on getting to that $25 mark?
So I can't speak to that today, Ian, as far as $25 an hour. I know that on the wage grid, the potential, some numbers that have been kicking around is just over $23. And maybe I'll just turn it over to Jodie to see for some more of that background, because I don't have those details, but I can definitely get you that if after this announcement.
Well, what I would speak to is that MCCA has actually long worked with People First HR Services, and we have a market competitive salary guideline scale that we've been indexing for the last 12 years, if not longer. So we actually have been working with People First since last October to re-index our scale in anticipation of the provincial wage grid. What our scale has always ventured to do is really do a deep analysis of the market, not just of early learning and childcare, but sectors that are similar in terms of compensation and workload. Not that there's anything that you can compare to early learning and childcare. I do need to say that. But are we being competitive? As I said earlier, are we paying as competitive rates as schools are for educational assistants, as other sectors, so that we are attracting and retaining the best and the brightest ECEs? And so we actually will be releasing our scale within the next couple of weeks. Again, we welcome the opportunity to work with our provincial government to say, this is the research, the scientific evidence that we have. How do we now move forward in terms of finding a provincial scale that will see equity among the sector?
Thank you. That concludes for them. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everybody.